Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Abby and today I'm going to show you what is on my knitting needles. I don't have any finished objects to show today, but I do have 4 different whips that I'll be talking about. And the first is this sweater that I'm working on. This is the Ilha by Orlane Sucche. I'm not sure if I'm saying any of that correctly, but that's my best guess. This is a circular yoke sweater knit from the top down, and it's got this nice raglan shaping in the second half of the yoke. The yarn that I'm using for this is Cloudborn Fibre's Highland fingering in the colorway Stormy Skies. It's a really beautiful bluish gray color, and it's kind of hard to photograph. Some pictures I've taken of it are like a bright blue, and then others are more of like a darker gray, so it's kind of interesting. Unfortunately, this yarn is discontinued and I think the company has shut down completely. I was able to pick this up from Webs on like a discount closing out sale, and I really like the yarn, so it's pretty unfortunate that you can no longer get it, at least that I'm aware of. I'm knitting the second size, which is the 41 3/4 inch yoke, and I think the fit is pretty much perfect. With round yokes, you always want like 2 to 3 inches of positive ease at least, even if you're going for like a more fitted look. And for this one, I was going for like a relaxed fit, so I don't really want an oversized fit, but I wasn't looking for like a tight fit. So I think that's about 5.5, 5.25, or 5 3/4 inch positive ease on me, and I think that worked out perfectly. So I'll show you a closer look of this yoke because that is kind of the star of the show here with this sweater. It's a really pretty cable and rib yoke, I would say. So we've got a couple different types of cables going on here. In between the cables there are eyelet increases, so it's like a little bit of a lacy effect, and then also some rib stitches thrown in there. And it kind of reminds me of the ranunculus sweater, but I like this one better, so I was really happy to have found this pattern. And as I mentioned earlier, it's got some raglan shaping here, so it's a pretty standard yoke shape, where the majority of the increases are in the second half of the yoke. And then just for like a bit of a nicer fit, it's got the raglan increases there in the second half, which I really like. I think that's just a great modification to make to the standard circular yoke sweater shape, and it just ends up fitting really nicely. Because this yarn is discontinued, I won't go on and on about it, but I just wanted to mention kind of why I chose this yarn. I couldn't find too many details about this yarn, but based on just what I've figured out from it, I'm pretty sure it's a woolen spun. That is what it looks like to me, and it's also very light and airy. And it is also a 2-ply. So there you can see the 2 plies, and then the twist itself, like I mentioned, is pretty airy. So it's not a very like springy yarn. It's pretty light. So this woolen spun 2-ply is not the best for cabled projects. If you really want your cables to stand out and have a lot of definition, you'll want to choose more of a worsted spun and closer to something like a 3 or more ply yarn. That's really going to give you the most definition and help your cables really stand out. And Mel Makes Stuff from here on YouTube actually just made a video all about how she chooses yarn for her cabled projects, and I really recommend checking that out. It was an excellent video that dove really deep into why certain yarns are best for cables, and also kind of how to break the rules a little bit and get essentially be able to make the decisions you need to get the outcome that you want. So I bring that up because if you look at this yoke, you can tell that it is pretty soft looking. The cables themselves are not like really popping out at you. I do think this yarn has some like decent stitch definition, but just in terms of like what I could be getting with more plies, like this is pretty different from that. I really like this effect. Like this is kind of exactly what I was going for. And it's also what the pattern designer went for as well. So the recommended yarn for this sweater has like a very similar structure and similar grist to the yarn that I chose. So I knew in knitting this sweater with this yarn, I was going to get like a similar look to that very like soft and like less defined yoke, which is like exactly what I wanted. So I think it turned out really nicely. The yoke was so much fun to knit and it was over way too fast. And then it's a sea of stockinette for the body. However, there is some more interesting elements. So on the sides here, there is a cable. This is the same cable that's at the very bottom of the yoke, and it's just alternating left and right cables all the way down the sides of the sweater, including into the ribbing. And then as you can see here, this is a really interesting ribbing detail where it's like alternated, twisted 1x1 rib, which I really don't see very often. It's such a simple way to change up your like standard 1x1 rib, but I've never knit with that specific rib before, and I thought that was really cool. I love details like that. The side cables are definitely a lot of fun and really helped keep up the momentum with the stockinette body. I feel like knitting round yoke sweaters like this, like you get past the fun part and then you're like, okay, well now I just have to knit like 5 miles of stockinette. But having those side cables kind of helped break up the monotony of the stockinette and just give me a little bit more of like, yeah, just a little bit more momentum as I was working on it. I will say though that I am not completely opposed to stockinette in the round because lately I've been really into reading while I knit, and that is like the perfect knitting for reading. And then as you can see here, I am working on the sleeve. I actually just made it to the ribbing, so I'm about to start that. And one interesting thing about these sleeves that I kind of didn't fully notice until I started knitting this sweater is that they're pretty like slouchy. They're somewhat of like an oversized sleeve. So I'm actually knitting the sleeve on 16-inch circulars, which I wouldn't normally do. And that's just because of the amount of fabric in the sleeve from the top to the bottom. And then to finish off the cuff, you knit this same alternating twisted rib. One thing to note about this yarn and this sweater in particular is that the gauge is really loose. It's knit at 5 1/4 stitches per inch on fingering weight yarn. So to get that, I had to use a size US 6 needle. And if you look at my gauge swatch, you'll see that there's a lot of light coming through the stitches. It's very like holy and it's just a very loose gauge. So there are a couple reasons why I typically stay away from a gauge this loose. One is that I'm just not a huge fan of it. Usually at this gauge you can see the undergarments under your sweater, so you just have to be aware of that when you're styling it. And then the second is that it tends to be a lot less hard wearing. So because there's more space between the stitches and it's so loose, one, it's a little bit more susceptible to like catching on things if you wear jewelry or just happen to walk by something that can catch your sweater. And then second, like there's just a lot more space for your yarn to wear down. So it's not nearly as hard wearing as a smaller gauge. That's why we knit socks at like as smallest gauge possible, because you want to create a really dense fabric that can withstand a lot of wear. And this type of gauge does not withstand that type of wear nearly as much. So that's why I usually don't like like when I see a sweater pattern with a gauge this loose, I'm usually like, I'll pass. However, I really liked this sweater, and I thought, you know what? Since I don't knit sweaters at this gauge, why don't I just try it and see? And this is a pretty hard wearing yarn to begin with, so I've maybe made it less hard wearing by knitting it at this gauge, but I think it's a pretty good yarn to just like try it out and see how it goes. And I really like how like drapey it makes this yarn. Again, it just kind of adds to that like softness. I think it turns this slightly rustic yarn into a very like romantic kind of sweater. So yeah, honestly, I didn't mind it. I mean, it knit up a lot faster than some of my other fingering weight sweaters, and so I liked that aspect of it. And I think it's kind of grown on me. I've started to really like the loose gauge and just the way that the fabric feels. I mean, it's very drapey, which again is just not something I typically go for. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it is kind of flying off the needles. The last thing I wanted to mention is about the fit. So this sweater has a really good fit, as I've said, but I like to add bust darts to my sweaters for an even nicer fit. The reason I like to do this is that my upper bust and my full bust has more than 2 inches of difference. So bust darts can just add like a little bit of extra fabric right there at your full bust and really just help shape your sweaters so that you don't end up with like the front of your sweater riding up, and just a number of other fit issues that you can have if you have that much of a difference between your upper and your full bust. So I decided to add horizontal bust darts, which means that I used short rows to create extra fabric. And all I did was about 1 inch under my sleeve separation. I started a few inches in from the side, and I just added a wedge of fabric that was about 2 inches total of fabric, and you can figure that out by using your gauge. It's pretty subtle. I use German short rows. You can kind of see the short rows there, which I don't really mind, and it's just one of those adjustments that to me is worth making, especially if I have anything less than like 5 inches of positive ease or maybe 6 inches of positive ease. I think anything more than that is probably good enough. It probably doesn't need bust darts, but anything less than that, I do think bust darts can really help your sweaters fit you better. The next whip that I have to show you is the Anticline mitts by Greene, and I am knitting this in the Fibre Cumbria fingering in the colorway Blencathra. I had this yarn left over from a project, and I figured that some fingerless mitts would be the perfect project for this single skein that I had in my stash. This last winter I realized I don't have any like neutral colored fingerless mitts that I've made, and I really reach for them whether I'm going on a walk or even just driving. Like, my hands get so cold, so I really like having some. This yarn is really interesting. It's a wool and mohair blend, so you can kind of see like the halo effect there, where it's kind of sticking, like little fibers sticking off of the fabric there. It is like slightly itchy, probably because of the mohair. I think I'm like a little bit sensitive to mohair, but I think once they're on my hands, like, it's not too bad. And I've actually already knit one of the mitts. This is the left one, and I'm currently working on the right one. And so you start at the cuff, you knit it in the round, and then you work up, work the thumb increases, and then you keep going and you work a pretty long hand. And that's because the way that you typically wear them is how I had them folded down like that. But on really cold days, and this is kind of the reason why I wanted to make these, plus they look really cool, but on the really cold days you can flip them up like this and wear them as more of a mitt or a mitten, just like that. And you can still have your fingers free, You can still, you know, do stuff on your phone and grab things easily, but you are covered a little bit more. But if you did want a little bit more range of motion, you just fold that down, and yeah, they're very functional, and also, like I said, they look really cool. I love this design here. They're a very structural style, which, if you know Emily Greene as a designer, that's typically, like, this is very her. A lot of her designs look similar to this. So one thing to note about these mitts is they are a bit of a labor of love. There is a lot of twisted rib. In fact, the entire thing is knit in twisted rib. So if you don't like twisted rib, I would pass on this pattern. But if you don't mind it, or if you like it, I think this is an excellent pattern. It is written very well. All of the charts are great. Everything's charted and written out. So if you don't like charts, it's written out row by row. And the way that she designed the charts with the increases for the thumb and everything, it's all really nice. Absolutely worth the, I think, $6 US. All of this shaping here is cables, and you do have to maintain the twisted stitches while you're cabling. And there's like 2 different types of cables here to fold, like, to get this effect. But I definitely think that they're worth it, and I honestly am having a lot of fun. Like, I really, when I cast these on, I just needed a pretty involved, intense knit that I could really focus on and kind of get lost in, and that's definitely what this pattern is. And so far the second mitt has been so much faster. Like, probably has taken me half the time to get to this point than it did on the first mitt, in part because, like, I understand the construction, I understand the charts. It's like a lot more intuitive to me now, and I don't have to like check every stitch of the chart because I kind of know what's coming. And then also because I've just made a lot less mistakes, or a lot fewer mistakes. In the first mitt, I did make a couple of mistakes. Trying to like drop down a column of stitches to fix something is actually pretty hard in this pattern, and I think it's because of the cabled stitches. You are like, these are all 2 by 2, or sorry, 1 by 1 cables, so you're effectively like switching the placement of 2 stitches for every single one of these columns. So yeah, dropping down to like fix a stitch was pretty difficult, and I just found it easier and almost faster to just tink back a couple of rows, go back, fix the mistake I made, and then keep going. So that did slow me down a little bit. I think I made like 2 mistakes while I was knitting this one, but that's kind of to be expected, especially because I usually am watching something while I'm knitting, and I'm like a little bit distracted while I'm knitting. So but so far the second one, I have not made any mistakes, and it's going a lot faster, and I'm really excited to have these awesome knits. This next whip is a cowl, which is a little bit different for me. I've knit a couple cowls. I used to be a lot more of like a shawl knitter than I am now, and so I think I liked cowls a little bit more than I do now. However, the reason I'm knitting this is because it is a Colorwork cowl. So I actually have not knit a lot of Colorwork before. It's one of those things that I have always loved, the look of it, but I've just never really like sat down to get a technique down that felt right for me. And so the few times that I've tried Colorwork, it was a bit of a slog to get through because I was dropping each color every time and then picking the new color up, and it just felt pretty tedious and slow. So I decided to try to fix that problem and actually learn a Colorwork technique that works well for me. And I thought a small project like a cowl would be the perfect project to learn better techniques for Colorwork. So And I can definitely say that so far I have really enjoyed Colorwork. I think I've gotten a much better technique down, and it's going a lot faster. Like when people talk about potato chip knitting, where you just want to like keep knitting and do one more row, like eat one more potato chip. I definitely understand what they're talking about with this project, because yeah, I really do just like want to keep knitting the next row. And I love seeing the beautiful Colorwork design knit up as I'm working on it. So this is the Endless Rose Cowl by Jeffrey Wall. It is a pattern for interweave that I just found on Ravelry, and I just really liked the like flower and like arrow design maybe. Yeah, I just really liked it. I thought it was pretty cool, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm probably a little less than halfway done, so it's a really like short cowl that just fits over your head one time. It's just like a loop, and then you can see here I've started with this provisional cast on, so when I get to the end of the cowl I will graft the two ends together into a loop. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's like exactly my style, but I think it will be nice to throw on when I go on walks, or if I just need something kind of small to keep my neck warm over my coat. And I do really like the colors. So I'm using stash yarn to knit this. The gray is Knit Picks palette in the colorway Finnley Heather. And it's a fingering weight yarn, so I'm holding it double because this is a DK weight cowl. I had it in my stash. I bought it for a sweater and ended up with some leftovers. So yeah, like I said, I'm just holding that double. And then for the other colors, this blue is Juniper Moon Farm Patagonia Organic Merino. It's a DK weight yarn, and this is in the colorway Turquoise. And then for the like greenish, this is Berroco Vintage DK in the colorway Scotch Pine. And I really like the like subtle difference between those two colors. These are very similar colors to what the original cowl was knit in, so that's kind of where I got the inspiration. And I really liked that I was able to use up these single skein yarns in my stash, and yeah, overall I really like how it's working up. So my goal with this pattern was really to learn continental color work. I'm a continental knitter. I hold the yarn on my left hand. So what I have been able to finally get down is holding both strands of the yarn in my left hand like this. So I have the yarn tensioned with my pinky as I normally do, and then my middle finger separates the two strands so that they don't like collapse together, and then my pointer finger holds the strands and tensions them up like this, so that as I'm knitting I can just pick whichever color I need to work. And that's been going really well. It took like a little bit to get it down, but once I got some practice in, it has been a lot easier and smoother to work color work. For the color dominance, I'm holding my contrast colors dominant, and I really like how that looks. And then also in this colorwork chart, there are some pretty long floats, I think like upwards of like 10 or 11 stitches. And so I am catching my floats mostly. I mean, it is a cowl, so, you know, all this is going to be on the inside. But just to try to get even tension on the right side, I'm catching my floats, and I'm using Paper Tiger's technique for that, which I will link in the description below. Okay, the last whip I have to show you is a bit different. So I am knitting a tie. This is for my partner. I saw this on the knitting subreddit. Someone posted that they were making one, and I sent it to my boyfriend, and he was like, "So you're gonna make me one, right?" And I was like, "Sure." So this has been kind of a fun easy project. It's almost like a long sock with no heel. This is a recipe, I would say. It's not exactly like an official pattern, but that same person who posted on Reddit posted a link to their Ravelry project, and they shared their pattern and like what they did in that Ravelry project page. So it's called The Dress Code Doesn't Specify, meaning you don't have to wear a silk tie to the office. You can wear a wool tie, and it is by ModularReality. So I'm having a lot of fun with this. Their pattern was great. Their notes were very clear in what to do. So you start here at the bottom with Judy's Magic Cast On, and then you increase on either side to 56 stitches, just like a sock toe, and then you gradually decrease all the way until you get to the like thinner part of the tie, and then you knit it straight for a while that way, and then you rapidly decrease for the other point of the tie. So it's really simple, but it's really nice to be able to follow their notes and not have to come up with that myself. But yeah, it's been really fun. You can see on this side I have marked all of my decreases. So there you go. And I think the total length of the tie will be 60 inches. So I've got quite a ways to go on this. But I mean, it's just one of those like mindless stockinette in the round. It's kind of like a sock, but it'll just be a very, very long sock. And the yarn I'm using is Blue Sky Fibers Woolstok Light, which is a fingering weight, in the colorway Wild Thyme. And actually I bought this to make a hat for myself, and that didn't happen. It's been turned into a tie. So it's a lot of fun, and like I said, just kind of a mindless project to work on. So those are all of the projects that I'm currently working on. I did want to show you a swatch for an upcoming project that I have planned, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, but I really like how the swatch turned out. It's very different for me. It's a very different color palette than what I typically go for, and yeah, I'm really excited about this. So I hope to be talking about it soon once I make some progress on this, but I just wanted to show you kind of an upcoming project. Also, I don't typically show like yarn purchases, mostly because I really only buy yarn for like specific projects, and then I just end up showing you the project. And also I don't typically buy a lot of like indie dyed yarn, but I follow Coast to Coast on Instagram, and she dyes, her and her team dye like very earth tone colors, and then they also do a lot of like book series inspired collections of yarn, which is really fun to see and follow. And she posted a couple, I'd say like a month ago, that she was doing a soup club. So for 3 months she'll be dyeing a mystery colorway inspired by soup, and I just loved that idea. Somewhat on a whim, I decided to participate in this club. I've never done any sort of indie dyed club before. That's just not typically how I personally make purchases, but apparently soup yarn were the magic words to get me to sign up for one. So I did, and the first month arrived quite a while ago now. This was January's colorway, so I feel fine sharing it. I think she's already shown it on her Instagram. But this is the split pea colorway with the crusty loaf mini. I love it so much. These are definitely my colors. And I think the next colorway is potato leek soup, which is one of my favorite soups. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like. Anyway, I just thought that was really fun. Great idea for a sock club, and it makes me laugh every time I look at it. And it was a lot of fun to update my partner on when my soup yarn was coming. It was a really big deal in my house, so it was a lot of fun. I'll probably end up making a pair of socks with this because it does have the mini, but I don't know, maybe I'll wait to see the entire collection and see if it goes together, and maybe I'll decide to make something with all of the yarn, but I definitely wouldn't mind having a pair of socks in this. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, let me know some of your favorite knitting podcasters or knitting channels here on YouTube are. I'll definitely check them out. And I also wanted to say thank you all for the comments on my last video. I wasn't sure if anyone was going to watch that video. So it was a lot of fun to read all of your comments, and everyone was so nice and it was great. So yeah, that's it. I'll see you next time.